All right, so get this right. What is actually real?
Hmm.
That's what we're diving into today.
Oh, that's a big one.
I know.
Yeah.
It feels like in this world of just endless information, like everyone's got their own truth, you know?
Yeah.
Luckily, we've got James Berryhill's article to help us out here, Reality Redefined. It's on Substack.
Oh, yeah. I read that one.
This thing is dense, but it might just help us figure this whole thing out, like what's real, what's not, what's a convincing story, you know?
Absolutely. Berryhill starts off by saying objective reality is all about what we can actually observe, what we can physically see and touch. But then, and this is where it gets really interesting, he talks about how even those observations can change over time.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying like my coffee cup is more real than like my dream of winning the lottery?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where the distinction between objective and subjective reality comes in. So your coffee cup, right? It's tangible, it exists in space and time.
Right.
But your lottery dream, well, it's vivid, it's meaningful, it's important to you, but ultimately it only really exists in your mind.
Okay, so my coffee cup is winning the reality contest for now.
For now.
But you said Berryhill argues that what we consider real can change as our understanding of the universe, evolves.
Exactly. It's like, think about dark matter.
Okay.
Or gravitational waves.
Okay.
For years, these were just ideas, theories. They existed in the minds of scientists.
Yeah.
But as we got better at observing, as our tools got better, as we could measure things more precisely, they crossed that line from subjective to objective.
Whoa. You're telling me that what we consider real can actually change over time.
Yeah.
That's kind of unsettling. It makes you wonder how much of what we accept as real today is based on incomplete information.
Or limited perspectives. Yeah, that's exactly why this framework, Berryhill's framework, is so powerful. It pushes us to be critical thinkers, to always be questioning our assumptions.
Right, not just taking things at face value.
Exactly, to look for evidence.
Which leads us to, okay, this is where it gets really mind-bendy, that Einstein quote. I cannot believe that the moon exists only when I look at it. Is he saying, that observation creates reality?
That's a great question. He's not necessarily saying that observation creates reality, but he is getting at the difference between the moon's objective existence and our subjective experience of it.
Okay.
The moon is always there,
right,
whether we look at it or not, but our perception of it, the fact that we are aware of it, that comes from our observation.
So there's a difference between the moon just being and us actually seeing it and processing that information.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I'm starting to get this.
Yeah.
So speaking of questioning assumptions, let's talk about Plato's cave.
Okay, yeah.
This part always, my head starts spinning a little bit.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Plato's cave is a classic allegory for how our senses can sometimes be deceiving us, leading us to mistake appearances for reality. So imagine you've got prisoners chained in a cave, and all they can see are these shadows.
They think the shadows are the reality.
Exactly. They have no concept of the outside world. They don't even know that there is an outside world. Just like, we might be limited by our own senses.
So we can't just accept what we see or hear as the whole truth.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where critical thinking comes in, right?
Yeah.
We got to dig a little deeper.
Look for evidence.
And challenge our assumptions. This, reminds me of Jung, the psychologist. He said that our subjective factor is just as real as objective reality. How can something be both subjective and objective, though? It feels like a paradox.
It is a bit of a paradox.
Yeah.
But Jung believed that our individual experiences, our consciousness, really shapes how we interact with the world, even though those experiences are inherently personal.
So even though my experience is, unique to me, it still has a real impact on how I see the world and interact with the world.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that leads us to one of Berryhill's most mind-blowing concepts.
Yeah.
Social constructivism.
Okay.
This is where we start to see how our social world really shapes what we perceive as real.
Okay, so, I'm ready to have my mind blown here.
All right, get ready.
This is the part of the article that really, got me thinking. It's so is Berryhill saying things like money, gender, nations, are these all just social constructs?
You got it.
Whoa.
Social constructivism argues that these concepts that we take for granted as facts are actually shaped by human interaction and social contexts.
So my entire understanding of reality just got flipped on its head.
Kinda.
The world is built on shared stories.
It is.
And we've all just kind of agreed to play along.
We have.
This is a lot to process. Before we jump into specific examples of how these social constructs actually play out in our lives, I think we need a moment to let this sink in.
Yeah, I agree. So we're back, and we're really diving deep into this idea of social constructs. Like, how much power do they really have in shaping the world around us, you know?
Yeah, I'm still wrapping my head around the idea that even things like nations and borders are basically just stories we tell ourselves, you know?
Right.
Like, we think of these things as so fixed and real, not some kind of collective imagination.
Yeah, it's a powerful illusion. It really is. But when you start to see it through this lens of social constructivism, all those hard lines, they kind of start to get blurry.
Right.
Berryhill uses this really interesting example, like crossing a remote border. Like, you can be standing in one spot, you take one step, and boom, suddenly you're in a different country. But nothing's really changed, right? Like, physically.
It's crazy.
Wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
We've drawn these lines in the sand and convinced ourselves that they have this deeper meaning.
Yeah.
And then we build these whole systems of control around it, like passports, customs, all that stuff. It's really, I don't know, it's trippy. And then you think about all the wars that have been fought over these lines on a map.
Oh, totally.
We're literally killing each other over something that's basically a shared delusion. It kind of makes you question, well, everything.
Everything.
So, okay, how does democracy fit into all of this whole social construct idea?
Well, think about the concept of, the people, right?
Right.
It's this abstract idea. We imagine this collective entity with a single unified will.
Uh-huh.
But the reality is, people have so many different opinions and beliefs, right?
Yeah, we don't all agree on everything.
Not all the time, no.
Right. So democracy relies on this kind of, I don't know, manufactured unity.
Yeah. It creates this illusion of collective agency, It's like the people making these decisions as one. But in reality, it's way more complicated than that. There are so many different power dynamics and things at play.
Okay, so nations, borders, democracy, all these things we thought were these solid concepts, they're actually just built on these shared narratives.
They are.
What else did Berryhill throw into this social construct bucket?
Well, get ready for this one, because this one's a real head scratcher. Time.
Okay, wait, you're saying if we all got together and decided to measure time in dog years, that'd be just as valid?
Well, you laugh, but it really highlights the point. We all experience this passage of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how we measure it, how we structure it, is totally based on these human conventions, calendars, clocks, time zones, all that.
Right.
These are systems we created, not some law of the universe.
You're saying how we divide up days, weeks, months, hours, minutes, all of it is basically arbitrary.
Exactly. It just underscores the power of these social constructs.
Yeah.
They shape even our most basic perceptions of everything, really.
Okay, my head is officially spinning. If all these things are basically just social constructs, does that mean there's no such thing as objective truth?
That's a great question. Berryhill doesn't deny that objective reality exists. But he does say that we can only really access it through our own subjective experiences.
Okay.
And through the context we live in, the social context.
So there might be some, objective truth out there, but we're all kind of looking at it through these, different lenses.
Exactly.
No wonder we can't agree on anything.
Right.
So this kind of brings us to another mind-blowing thing that Berryhill talks about, right?
Yeah.
Which is the idea that this shared reality that we all talk about.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more of an illusion than we realize.
It might be.
It might be.
It really challenges this assumption that we all experience the world in the same way.
It's funny. The more we talk about this, the more I realize how often I assume that everyone sees things the way that I do. But I've definitely had those moments where I'm like, wait a minute, you're seeing this completely differently than I am.
Absolutely. And you're looking at the same thing.
The exact same thing.
Yeah.
And Berryhill talks about several factors that play into this illusion of shared reality, right?
He does, yeah.
And one of them is just the simple fact that our individual realities are always going to be a little different, right?
They are, yeah.
Our backgrounds, our experiences, our beliefs, our personalities, it all shapes how we interpret the world.
Absolutely.
We're back to those goggles again, right?
We are, yeah.
The reality goggles. And then on top of that, you have these linguistic and cultural limitations, right?
Oh, yeah.
Even if we're speaking the same language, words can have different meanings, different feelings, different connotations.
They do.
And then you throw cultural differences on top of that, and things can get really lost in translation.
Oh, yeah.
Berryhill uses this example, it's so fascinating,
Yeah.
of how the Inuit people have all these different words for snow.
I love that example.
Right. Their language has this like deep understanding of this one thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we're over here in English and we're like, it's snow.
It's just snow.
Right. It's white and cold.
Exactly.
That's
It's right there. It shows how differently we see the world, you know?
Absolutely.
Just in that one example.
So even when we think we're communicating clearly, there's always a chance that things are getting lost or maybe our realities don't quite line up. Sure. Then on top of all of that, Berryhill says we have to deal with our own cognitive limitations.
Right.
Our brains can only process so much information at once. Right. So they kind of take shortcuts, they make assumptions, and they filter out what seems irrelevant.
It's like our brain is playing tricks on us all the time.
It's like those optical illusions.
Oh, yeah.
Where you can see two different images depending on how you're looking at it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good reminder that our brains are always like interpreting what we see,
Oh, my
It's not just a passive recording.
Exactly.
We're always interpreting. So even when we're trying our best to be objective, our own minds can make it impossible to have a truly shared reality with anyone else. This whole conversation has been a real trip.
It has.
I always knew people saw things differently.
Yeah.
But I never realized just how differently.
You're right.
And how those differences really shape our reality.
They do.
Our individual realities.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this Berryhill's framework is so cool. It really encourages us to move beyond this like simplistic view of one shared reality, and to really embrace the complexity of human experience.
Yeah.
It's almost like this call for radical empathy.
It is.
Like recognizing that everyone is truly experiencing the world in their own unique way.
That's a great way to put it.
And that can be really powerful, I think.
It can. It can help us be more understanding and compassionate, more open to different ideas.
You can. This makes me wonder, though, if so much of what we consider real is based on these shared beliefs and narratives, do we have the power to, change those narratives? Can we reshape reality?
That's such an interesting question, and it's one that Berryhill starts to get into in the next part of his article, where he looks at what this framework means for how we see ourselves,
Right.
and the world around us.
Okay, so we're going to dive into that next, right?
Yeah.
After a quick break.
Yes.
Stay tuned.
Stay with us. We're going to keep going down this rabbit hole of reality.
Buckle up, folks.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about, if reality is so subjective and shaped by these shared narratives, do we have the power to actually change them?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it?
It is. It is.
And Berryhill argues that, recognizing the constructed nature of reality isn't about just dismissing it. It's about understanding how it works.
Right.
And then thinking about how we might reshape it.
So it's not like we're saying none of this stuff is real.
Yeah.
It's just recognizing that we actually have some agency here, right? Instead of just feeling trapped by all these forces that shape our lives, it's like, wait a minute, maybe we can influence this stuff.
We can be active participants.
Yeah.
Instead of just passively accepting the way things are.
Right, right. This makes me think about poverty, inequality, war, all the problems in the world, right?
Big problems.
What if, and this is crazy, what if these are just consequences of the stories we've been telling ourselves for centuries?
Right.
And what if, by changing those stories, we could actually make the world a better place?
That's what Berryhill seems to suggest. That once we recognize the power of these constructs, we can start to evaluate them critically.
Okay.
And maybe even reshape them.
So it's instead of just accepting things like borders and nations and these economic systems, we can actually take a step back and say, wait a minute, do these things actually serve us?
Exactly.
Are they helping us or are they hurting us?
Do they create conflict or do they help us cooperate?
Yeah. It's about moving beyond just accepting the world as it is and actually imagining how it could be better.
Yeah.
This whole conversation has been, I don't know, it's been like a roller coaster, but in a good way.
It is mind-bending, but it's also exciting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If reality is so fluid and malleable, we're not just these passive observers.
We're creating it.
Yeah. We're literally co-creating the world, with our thoughts and our actions and our beliefs.
We are. And that leads us to a final thought that Berryhill doesn't explicitly address in the article, but I think is really important.
Okay.
If reality is this subjective, what does that mean for how we influence each other?
Oh, that's deep.
Through narratives, through social constructs, all these things we've been talking about.
That makes you think about the responsibility that we all have in shaping each other's realities. And it also makes you wonder, how ethical is it to influence people's perceptions.
Right, yeah. Think about propaganda or even misinformation.
Or even just the stories that we tell each other.
Yeah, it's a huge question.
It is. It's a lot to think about. But I think the biggest takeaway for me from this whole deep dive is that, reality is way more complex and, changeable than we think it is.
It is. And that can be scary, but it's also incredibly exciting because it means we have the power to make things better.
Exactly. We can question our assumptions, be more open to new ideas, and most importantly, I think we can be more conscious about how we're shaping our own realities and, the reality that we share with everyone else.
Well said.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. We'd love to hear from you, our listeners. What are your thoughts? What really resonated with you from this conversation? What assumptions did we challenge? What are you going to do differently now that you know just how much power you have in shaping reality? Share your thoughts, share your questions, share your unique perspective. Because remember, your reality is just as valid and important as anyone else's. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.